Hi. In my hands, I have 28 memoirs from the crime author Robert Knightly. Robert Knightly is a former New York cop, a criminal defense lawyer for the state, and a crime author. And tonight, he's going to read one of these memoirs for us. He's going to read Getting to Know Mad Dog. Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan was a hitman. He's doing time, a lot of time. But this story takes us back to 1977, when Robert Knightly, as a young cop with 5 other cops, burst through the doors of a Puerto Rican social club in Bushwick and arrested Mad Dog Sullivan. Little did he know that the next morning, when he was charged in court, that Mad Dog Sullivan's lawyer would be a former US Attorney General, Ramsey Clark. The plot thickens. The story's fantastic. So please, tune in and hear all about how Robert Knightly met Mad Dog Sullivan. Thanks.
My name is Robert Knightly. I'm a writer, among other things, and I wrote a story that was published in Brooklyn Noir 3 from Akashic Books. They published other stories of mine in other noir volumes, and I edited Queens Noir for Akashic Books. The story was written in 2008, and it was based on an arrest I made as a New York City patrolman in 1977. I arrested a infamous criminal named Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan. I arrested him in Brooklyn with not by myself, I assure you. I was one of a team of 5 NYPD officers who arrested a bunch of people in a social club, and Mad Dog was among them. Mad Dog was the only one with a loaded firearm, a 25 Beretta automatic loaded with 6 live rounds. Mad Dog was a hitman for the mafia. And when he was finally jailed and kept there in 1981, the FBI credited him, if you can call that a credit, with 31 hits. That's assassinations, killings of mob figures on behalf of one mob for another. So I met Mad Dog on, I'll tell you how. Getting to know Mad Dog. It is a convention of crime fiction that the detective is haunted by the case he did or didn't solve. Me, I never was a detective. Too many off-duty incidents in bars. But I did have some memorable moments, as in hair-raising, as a patrolman in the 1970s. In Bushwick specifically, the self-styled fighting 83rd Precinct, and not without justification. The 70s in New York City was the worst of times, and that crime was rampant. The city was on the brink of bankruptcy, had laid off a quarter of the police force, and arsonists, for profit or revenge, were busy burning down the wood-framed tenements of Bushwick, to the point where whole blocks had the look of a lunar landscape. But the 70s were also the best of times, in that a cop never had a dull moment. Cops of the Fighting 83rd were a tight band of brothers. Female officers had yet to debut in the patrol precincts. We were bound together by the shared perils of the street. On the night of July 13, 1977, the lights went out in Bushwick and everywhere else in the city. In what the media has referred to as blackout looting, larceny commenced forthwith along a 2-mile stretch of Broadway in Brooklyn, the main shopping artery dividing Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood from Bushwick. Bodegas, supermarkets, discount furniture emporia, a gun shop, jewelry, clothing, and shoe stores had the gates ripped from the doorways, and the contents inside were carried off into the night. For extra measure, the stores were then set afire. All that night and into the next day, we cops roamed streets that looked like the siege of Atlanta, as pictured in the movie version of Gone with the Wind. And yet, despite the Sturm und Drang, it is not the events of that blackout night that remain in the forefront of my memory. That place of honor belongs to Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan. Mad Dog and I met in an after-hours Puerto Rican social club on a cold January night in 1977, when neighborhood cops, myself among them, were motoring through the streets of Bushwick in what was known as a precinct conditions car, an unmarked Plymouth sedan, also known as the brown car, the scourge of drug dealers, gunsels, chop shop operators, counterfeiters, and after-hours social clubs that catered to the ungodly. Shortly after midnight, we exited said vehicle and burst through the barred front door of the Puerto Rican Club on Jefferson Street, just off Knickerbocker Avenue in Bushwick. As we made our entrance, glassine envelopes and various drug paraphernalia floated to the floor like autumn leaves. But what caught my attention was two white guys sitting by themselves in a corner, the only non-Latinos present. So my first words to the two as they sat at the table looking up at me were, "On your feet and against the wall." I gave the muscular guy to my left a little push against the wall, off which he bounced, spun around, and stood stock still staring at me. He was Irish looking, 5'10", with a mustache and chiseled features. Thus, without benefit of names, did I make my initial acquaintance with Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan. The first thing I noticed about Mad Dog was his flat, dark, dead eyes, with which he assessed me for a long minute, then slowly turned around and assumed a position on the wall. His Italian-looking stablemate did the same without objection. Looking down at the floor, I found something that didn't surprise me, a Beretta semi-automatic pistol, which I would later discover was loaded with 7 live rounds, one in the chamber. I hollered gun, whereupon the 4 of the cops with me focused attention on the 2 guys I had on the wall. I didn't find out who these desperados were until we got back to the precinct house for arrest processing. We had a dozen other patrons of the bar for various drug possession offenses, but only Mad Dog and his companions for the gun. In those days, there were no computers. You made phone call to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation at NYPD headquarters in downtown Manhattan. BCI eventually identified one Joseph Sullivan, also known as Mad Dog, on lifetime parole as a convicted murderer. His Italian cohort was Anthony Snooky Solimini, a Genovese soldier out of place here because around the corner on Knickerbocker Avenue were the Bonanno family lads, sipping espresso and plotting mayhem. In those days, everything was done manually. You took a prisoner by the hand and rolled his fingertips over an ink pad and then pressed each one onto a print card. Then you handcuffed the prisoner and went through his personal effects. Then you vouchered, recorded, and packaged drug evidence for the police lab and the gun for ballistics, after which you transported the guy downtown to Central Booking, which back in the day was on Gold Street in downtown Brooklyn. There he would be processed further, and a cop like me would be interviewed by an assistant district attorney who would draft charges based on what I told him. With these particular arrests, both my prisoners stood to be charged with felony possession of a loaded gun if I wanted to go by the book. But it was a tenuous charge to lay against both. What I had to do, practically speaking, was select the one more likely to have possessed the weapon. Based on my estimation of Mad Dog's background, he was elected as the guy who made a motion under the table to toss the gun. A complete fiction, but no more of a fiction than those invented by prosecutors and judges in criminal court, where they're known as legal fictions. Although my statement to the assistant DA could be seen as a lie, it was in fact expected as a professional courtesy. The last thing a prosecutor or judge wants to hear in a criminal case is what actually happened. What they wanted was what they could put together to make a solid case against whomever the perpetrator was that I had dragged downtown. So every cop in my day would say what he was expected to say in order for the wheels of justice to grind exceedingly slowly and for no bad guys to escape. This is no doubt true even today, as I do not expect anything has changed. So the DA was pleased to accept my legal fiction that I saw Mad Dog ditch something under the table. After all, he had Mad Dog's complete and lengthy history on his yellow sheet, so-called because a criminal record was then printed on yellow paper. Mad Dog had been paroled after being sentenced to 20 to 30 years in 1967 upon conviction of manslaughter. Yet there he was in 1977 in my clutches, which was a mystery to us all. What was known, though, is that we had a very bad guy on our hands. As the DA said, we're going to stick it to this guy. He's going back upstate. I could certainly endorse the sentiments, so I gave the DA a story he could live with. We then adjourned to the courtroom. By this time, the sun had risen and day court was in session. In those days, the arresting officer actually went to court with the prisoner for arraignment. Not so today, as the police department, in its wisdom, has found a way to avoid all the overtime wages involved in having a police witness to a crime appear in court with the perpetrator. So there we were, waiting for the case to be called, so we could stick it to Mad Dog and send him back upstate where he belonged. Then Mad Dog's lawyer appeared, Mr. Ramsey Clark, the former Attorney General of the United States. I recognized Clark, even though my partners didn't. Certainly the court did, and so did the DA. And he and the judge fawned all over the ex-Attorney General. Of course, Clark didn't have a clue as to criminal court procedure. However, the legal aid lawyer on arraignment duty couldn't do enough for Ramsey, leading him by the hand through an unfamiliar procedure. Oh, by the way, how was it that Mad Dog Sullivan got teamed up with the former Attorney General of the United States? Well, Ramsey Clark had evidently been instrumental in gaining parole for Mad Dog in December 1975. Since 1967, Mad Dog had been incarcerated at Attica Correctional Facility, which is so far upstate you can hear Canadians hiccuping on the other side of the border. Maybe Canada is where Mad Dog had been heading when he escaped from Attica in 1971 by hiding in a delivery truck on its way out of the penitentiary gates. Thus goes the honor to Joseph Sullivan as the only inmate in the history of Attica to ever have busted out. But he wasn't missing for long. 2 months after his departure, Mad Dog was captured on West 12th Street and University Place in Greenwich Village by agents of a state task force. A judge slapped an additional 10 years onto his sentence and he was returned to prison. Ramsey Clark was at the time active in the prison reform movement, and Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan became something of a movement poster boy. Just as the Brooklyn novelist Norman Mailer was attracted to the late murderer writer Jack Henry Abbott, author of the acclaimed In the Belly of the Beast, so too was Ramsey Clark fascinated with Mad Dog Sullivan. And just as Jack Henry Abbott had failed to mend his homicidal ways while on parole, thanks in part to Mailer's efforts in creating a cause celebre, Abbott was free to fatally stab a young waiter at the Binny Bond Cafe in the East Village. Mad Dog Sullivan also eschewed the path of redemption. Sometime after Ramsey's intervention on behalf of inmate Joseph Sullivan, the newly paroled Mad Dog was a suspect in the execution of Mickey Spillane, ex-boss of the Irish mob in Hell's Kitchen, not to be confused with the nom de guerre of a certain crusty pulp novelist. Spillane was shot dead on May 13, 1977, outside his hideaway apartment in Woodside, Queens, where he mistakenly believed he was living under the radar. Mad Dog was never charged with the hit, nor was anyone else. As it happens, Mad Dog's youth was spent in the vicinity of Woodside. He grew up in Richmond Hill, Queens, where he committed his first murder. His last recorded murder occurred on December 17, 1981, when Mad Dog took a shotgun to John Fiorino, a reputed mafioso and vice president of Teamsters Local 198. Mad Dog was convicted of killing Fiorino outside the Blue Gardenia restaurant in upstate Irondequoit near Rochester. Mad Dog is today a 69-year-old resident of the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. No relation of Mad Dog the inmate to Sullivan County, the pen. He's eligible to appear before the New York State Parole Board for the first time in the year 2069. Jack Henry Abbott died in the Wend Correctional Facility in 2002. Unless Mad Dog Sullivan sees his 130th birthday, his fate is likewise sealed. And so there I was in a courtroom with Ramsey Clark and his toady from Legal Aid. As I sat and listened with foreboding, with an inkling that Mad Dog might not have to go north after all. As it happened, my instincts were correct. Later on, out in the hallway, the DA approached me and said, we didn't have a case anyhow. I didn't bother pointing out that he'd said earlier we had a very solid case. Then Ramsey and Mad Dog emerged from the courtroom. Mad Dog had the grace and style to ignore us cops. Ramsey came over to me with a look of compassion and said these words I will never forget. "Officer, I think justice was done." To which I replied, "I doubt it, Ramsey." Well, Mad Dog has stayed with me all these years, and I have followed his career as best I can. I have discovered both what he'd done before we met in January of 77 and what he did after. Most of this I learned from Mad Dog's autobiography entitled Tears and Tears. You know, tears refers to the line of cells in a prison. It's called a tier. A seminal book self-published by Mad Dog and his wife, Gail Sullivan, and first released in 1997. One thing I learned from the autobiography was that before we met in 77, Mad Dog had been paroled from Attica in December of 75, despite a murder conviction, and as mentioned, his being the only escapee from Attica back in 71. An extraordinary guy, this Joseph Sullivan, and an inscrutable situation from a legal point of view. Not long after his parole in May of 76, Mad Dog had a relapse. He hooked up with an old comrade, a maid member of the Genovese crime family, who brokered gainful employment as a hitman for Mad Dog. Mad Dog was to be under the direct supervision of Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, top boss of the Genovese organization. On July 20, 1976, Mad Dog did his first job for the family by executing Tom Devaney, an enforcer for the Mickey Spillane mob, forerunner of the more famous Westies gang of Hell's Kitchen. Mad Dog put a bullet in Tom Devaney's head as Tommy was drinking at a Hell's Kitchen bar, after which on a sunny day in August of 76, he did the same to another Spillane enforcer, one Eddie the Butcher Comiskey in another saloon. In his autobiography, Mad Dog tells us that he also did 3 or 4 subsequent hits, but he doesn't identify the bodies. Mad Dog was being employed by the Genovese crime family that wanted to take over the West Side piers, and we're not working for the Westies. We're not working for the mafiosi. He worked for the new Westies gang, which succeeded the old Westies. Mad Dog put a bullet in Tom Devane. We said that then Mad Dog and I met on January 29th, 1977. A week prior to our evening meeting in the daylight hours of January 22nd, Mad Dog gunned down Tom the Greek Kapatos on a Midtown Manhattan street, according to the autobiography and T.J. English's account, author of Paddy Whack, The Untold Story of the Irish-American Gangster. When he walked out of court a free man, thanks to Ramsey Clark, Mad Dog was given a new assignment by his handlers within the Genovese family. All this I know from Mad Dog's own account in his autobiography. Although he has changed names and dates, but I was able to piece it together from other background materials. That assignment was to hit Carmine Cigar Galante, boss of the Bonanno crime family, who ironically began his career as a hitman for the late patriarch Vino Genovese. When I and my partners arrested Mad Dog, he was around the corner from the hangouts of the Bonanno crime family and the espresso joints along Knickerbocker Avenue. Up to the summer of '78, Mad Dog was running all over the city trying to corner Carmine Galante and knock him off. He explained in his book he was unable to do so on account of being called off the job finally by Fat Tony Salerno. On July 12, 1971, however, Galante was sent to his maker at the hands of others, murdered by close-range shotgun blasts just as he finished eating lunch in the back garden of Joe and Mary's restaurant at 205 Knickerbocker Avenue in Bushwick. He'd been dining with his cousins Giuseppe Torano and his bodyguard, Leonard Capola. Then along came the shooters, Anthony Bruno Indelicato, Dominic Big Trinchera, Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano, and Cesare C.J. Bonaventure, and Louis Gaeta Giangretti. And the rest became pictorial history. The tabloids captured a photograph of the late Mr. Galante, sprawled in his own blood, in the garden at Joe and Mary's, cigar firmly clenched between his teeth. We used to have lunch, myself and my partners at Joe and Mary's, but fortunately not on that particular day. Considerably irritated at losing the Carmine Galante project after so much investment of his professional time, Mad Dog did a few robberies and freelance killings until he was arrested by an FBI task force in Rochester in early 1982. They collared him for an alleged bank job. The feds were confident they could send Mad Dog out of the state, namely to the U.S. Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, where John Gotti was incarcerated until shortly before his death in 2002. Mad Dog credited an excellent pair of lawyers recruited by his friend Ramsey Clark, naturally, for getting him acquitted on the Rochester bank robbery charge. But he would not so easily escape state prosecution. The state hauled Mad Dog back into court for several homicides and assorted other violent crimes, culminating in a long murder trial in 1982 in Manhattan before the famous jurist Judge Harold Rothweiss. He was convicted and was sentenced to 87 years and 6 months, plus 99 years to life. And there he remains. Mad Dog remains in Sullivan County State Prison. But this is not the end of my story. There's an epilogue. What goes around comes around. Every cop subscribes to this philosophy, which is relevant here because for an Irish cop, I'll call Nanny. When I was working in the Bushwick precinct, Danny was assigned to the 9th precinct in the East Village. My own first assignment in 68 and 69. We used to drink together in Murphy's Bar in Greenpoint, the very Brooklyn neighborhood where we both were raised. Danny was a big, gentle guy who shouldn't have been drinking. He couldn't handle it. Neither could I. I quit the drinking life New Year's Day, 1980. Danny didn't. Some years later, while he and his sergeant were bouncing in bars in Manhattan on St. Patrick's Day, Danny fell into an alcoholic blackout and shot the sergeant to death. Danny had no recollection of the shooting and put up no defense at his trial for murder in the second degree. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 years to life in state prison. State prison is a hard road for a police officer. Normally, a cop inmate is kept segregated from the general population. But Danny chose not to be confined to his cell for 23 hours a day. Instead, he went into general population and was soon confronted in the yard by a wise guy of the Genovese persuasion, whose ass he proceeded to kick. This earned Danny a mob contract on his life, whereupon the prison authorities transferred him immediately to another maximum security facility, where as fate would have it, he met Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan. Mad Dog approached Danny in the yard to tell him that he'd heard how he kicked the wise guy's ass and to tell Danny that he hardly approved. If the story he'd heard was true, Danny was further told that he could take his place on Mad Dog's personal work gang in the prison. To go it alone in prison is to invite rape or death. Danny quickly confirmed the story. Danny survived unmolested. Actually, he was freed after 8 years in prison when his conviction was overturned because of errors at trial. Instead of another trial, he was allowed to take a guilty plea in return for time served. What motivated Mad Dog to save Danny's life? Was it their shared Irish heritage? Or the fact that Mad Dog's father was, of all things, a first-grade detective with Brooklyn's 78th precinct in Park Slope until his early death by natural causes in the 1950s? Or was it Mad Dog's disdain for the Genovese family, which had turned a deaf ear to his appeals for help when the FBI task force was closing in on him back in Rochester? Who knows? One more thing, which is a grievance I have with Gail Sullivan, Joseph's wife, who's penned the autobiography, which is a very interesting book. It's first person in Mad Dog's voice, and she's down as the author. Well, it's okay with me. In his book, she wrote that many law-abiding citizens, including an investigator for ex-Mad Rudy Giuliani, described Mad Dog as one of the most respected inmates in the New York State system. That may be so, and I accept that Mad Dog has done many good deeds while behind bars upstate. The rescue of my old pal Danny, for one. But just how is it that while Mad Dog lives so vividly in my memory, a fateful meeting rates nary a line in his autobiography? Makes you feel like a blind date, a one-night stand, you know? Mad Dog. Me and Mad Dog. Thank you.
Thanks.
The patrolman's, they call it a memo book or activity log. And you're required to have this on patrol at all times and to make entries of what you do, where you go, and what happens. And this is my notes on the documents that are inside. Arrested with Mad Dog. The second person was Anthony Solimini. Solimini had a long criminal record, and as it turned out, they were old friends. Solimini and Mad Dog had been in juvenile prison together when they were teenagers, and kept up the friendship afterward, apparently.